Okay, so I think we'll get started. Good afternoon. I'm Max Gomberg with the State Water Resources Control Board. I'm the manager for climate and water conservation. If you're one of the people who feels that whatever the target in your community is set too high, I'm to blame. I'm here with Professor Frank Loge from UC Davis, and we're going to have a hopefully interactive session here this afternoon about a lot of what's already been discussed today, right? We've heard a tremendous amount of good ideas for the types of technologies that we need to implement, the ones that are already there that need to be scaled, some of the barriers to getting those technologies implemented, everything from, we've heard about money, we've heard about culture, we've heard about sort of inertia, we've heard about regulation and some other categories. So what we really want to do with those of you who are here is talk about the how. You know, how does this, how do we take all this and as government put in place some type of policies, incentives, et cetera, to get the type of innovation and deployment of technology that we know that California is capable of, because this is California after all. So I like to do a sort of thought experiment of sort of thinking backwards. So it's 2015 and we're in the midst of a severe drought, but it's looking increasingly likely that there will be an El Nino this winter, and that El Nino may bring us a lot of precipitation. So let's imagine that we get that El Nino, and then for the next 6, 7 years, we get a pretty good amount of rain. You know, we don't have continued drought conditions. But then starting 2022 or so, it's dry again, and we have consecutive dry years all the way through to 2025. And so what I want us to imagine is, okay, now it's 2025, 10 years from now, we're in the midst of another severe drought. The population of the state has increased by, say 5 million people or so. We have the same amount of agricultural production we've had. And so the question is, what have we done between now and then in the last 10 years, counting backwards from 2025 to now? What types of technologies have been deployed that help us get through this next drought? Because we need those technologies and we need them to be scaled. So the question is it going to be simply the steady state adoption curve of things we've seen in terms of low flow appliances, right? We've seen continued sort of increases in adoption rates of everything from toilets to shower heads, washing machines, dishwashers and the like in the residential sector. In the commercial sector, we've seen increasing adoption of things in the restaurant industry, for example, of pre-rinse spray valves, and other types of technologies, irrigation controllers, smart irrigation controllers. And we've seen sort of the adoption rate for these creeping up. But we haven't seen, you know, the curve really swing upwards. And so the question is that going to be sufficient for our next drought, and the drought after that, and the drought after that? Because these droughts are coming. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when, and how long they'll be, and how severe they'll be. California's always had droughts. That's the climate we live in. And now with climate change, our droughts are even more severe than they used to be. So, you know, we're getting towards the wrap up, and the next section is going to be, you know, sort of summary of all these ideas and then next steps. What can the state government overall do legislatively, in the regulatory sphere, in incentives and financial assistance and technical assistance to make sure that we do have that resilience that other speakers have spoken about earlier? Because without it, we're going to find ourselves in a world of hurt even beyond what we're experiencing now. So we have a really stellar group of universities in this state. We're funding them. A lot of them, you're going to hear from Frank, are involved in a lot of research and development in this space. We have a tech industry. We have all the ingredients for I think a real sort of technological flowering or renaissance, if you will. And the question is, what's sort of the magic ingredient? And so what's that spark that's going to really move it at a much greater pace? And so the example I'm going to use, and I'm going to turn it over to Frank, is meters, right? We've heard all day long about the need for more data, better data, the ability to analyze that data and then put that data to use. Well, most of the way we collect data is through putting a meter on something. That's how we collect it. That's the physical device that collects the data. And what you haven't heard too many people say today is that meters are expensive. Part of the reason that we don't have wider deployment of meters is because they're expensive. And it's really hard to convince any unit of government, from a water supplier, large or small, to the state, to the legislature, that we should make a tremendous amount of money available for meters because they're expensive. Did I mention they're expensive? All right. It's the post-lunch sort of crowd. I get it. So I think, part of our challenge is thinking through, again, what we can do on the regulatory and incentive side to get to the goal that everyone agrees upon, which is we need this data, we need to make better use of it. But the question which I will put to Frank and let him answer and in his remarks is, so we've done really well, for example, on the energy side. The cost of generating solar electricity, whether it's from rooftop or utility scale, has really dropped. How do we get there with meters?
Good afternoon. I'm Frank Loge. I'm a professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of California, Davis, and I'm also the director for the Center for Water Energy Efficiency on the UCD campus as well. And when we started that center, we probably should have come up with a better name, but that's the name we came up with, and now we're stuck with it. So I just wanted to use this. I have a few minutes to talk, just as all of you will have an opportunity here to talk in a minute. Just to share with you some of my thoughts. I'll go quickly through the ones that have already really been fully kind of fleshed out, but I do want to focus on a couple of things. So, if we look to 2020, 2030, 2040, and what we kind of envision our water system looking at like as it relates to urban water use, I think we're going to see a lot different landscapes. Obviously, cash for grass is becoming very popular in Southern California. We'll swap out turf. We'll replace it with low water use plants. I also think we'll see much larger adoption rates for water efficient technologies in both the commercial, industrial, and residential sectors. And as we saw earlier today, the adoption of low flow toilets is still, it's not as great as it could be. So I think there's a lot of existing technologies that will be adopted at a much higher rate in 20, 30 years out. But I'm going to touch upon a few things that haven't been as fully developed today that I think are really important as well. So I'm going to preface a few things I'm going to say next with some questions first. So how many people know what their water use was last month? So half the room maybe? And how many of you know how you compare to others who are like you? So even, well, that for that month or just in general. So maybe half of the half, roughly. This touches upon a really important element when you start talking about the drought and this idea of us needing to help promote the adoption of water conservation technologies and water use efficiency technologies is one of the first things that has to happen is there has to be a motivation for doing that. Certainly the drought is part of that motivation, but a secondary motivation is for all of us to understand, are we good actors or bad actors? If I've adopted a lot of water use efficiency technologies in my household and I'm asked to conserve water even further, my response is going to be, I've done enough, it's someone else's job. And I imagine that many of us say that such that the adoption rate is a lot less than it could be. So I think one of the first things that needs to happen to help promote the adoption of these technologies is to begin to help people understand what their water use is and how you compare to other people. So WaterSmart's a startup company who's in California that are helping people do that. But this ties into Max's question, which is water meters is a first step. You need a water meter in order to message that information to a customer. But ideally, you don't want to message that information once a month or once every other month. You want to message it on a more frequent basis. So you want to message it ideally every day, or at least before you cross the next tier in your rate structure. So you get a message saying you're close. You might want to try to cut back on water use until, for the next 5 days until you pass into the next month, the next billing cycle. So that then gets into, we not only need water meters, but we need water meters that collect information on a fairly frequent basis. So this is AMI. We've heard a lot about AMI. So that's a necessary first step. But then the other thing that we really haven't talked much about today is there are companies out there, or there's a lot of interest out there on the Internet of Things. And so the Internet of Things is this basic idea that we can sensor everything in our world around us, our cars, our Fitbits we heard about, but basically we can sensor everything and pull all that information in. So that's the Internet of Things. All of you are a thing with different types of sensors, and your household has different sensors, these different things. And you pull all that information in, and that information, the concept is it's very valuable. You can do different things with it. So in looking forward, not only do we need to drive down the cost of AMI, because that's a really necessary first step to help all of us understand how much water we use, we also really have to, I think, help promote these companies. They're out there, they're starting. Belkin is one, and I'll talk about their technology in a second, but to help these companies that are trying to promote the Internet of Things related to the water sector, and it doesn't necessarily have to be residential in your house. It could be also on the utility side. But I think we're going to see substantial growth in that sector as well as the processing of that information back to the end user, whether it's the water utility or if it's an industry or an actual household. But as an example, so WaterSmart exists. They're messaging water use. Ideally, they could do it with any type of water meter, but ideally they would have AMI meters. As far as I know, they're not currently doing it on a more frequent basis than every month. I might be wrong, but the basic idea is if you start incorporating that into the Internet of Things, such as the technology that Belkin is coming out with, that's not commercially available yet, but it's in production, is a technology that allows you to disaggregate your indoor water use. So based on the signature, so you install this technology on your water main, and then you turn on all your faucets, and you run down and you tell this thing what that was, and you turn on your toilets and you tell it what it was. Just based on the pressure signal that gets sent through your water line, it can then know where that water is being used. So now, so it's just an example. It's not only are you getting information about your household water use based on AMI, which is great, you can begin to disaggregate that to understand where exactly are you using your water and where exactly might you improve the water based on where it's currently being used. So I think that's one area that we'll see a lot of growth in the coming years. And I think as that happens, I think the price of these sensors by definition will have to come down, because that's the only way to actually have them penetrate the market in any substantial way. The two other things I wanted to mention that haven't been mentioned yet in any great detail, one is I think we're going to see a lot of growth in gray water reuse in the state of California. And I think one of the things, and we've had some great advances in our regulations related to that, but I think one of the things that would help most is for changes in codes and standards as it relates to new residential construction and having all the homes dual plumbed. So now you not only collect your gray water from your washing machine, which is pretty much what everyone does today, you can collect gray water from every device in your house or every location in your house that produces gray water, not black water. So you can increase the amount of gray water available greatly. And then the final thing, which is looking out even a little further, and is a little bit more subject to people saying, no, this will never work, but I do really think we need to move in the direction of decentralized water reclamation so that you can start doing it not only on a commercial scale or at a commercial building, but ideally setting as a goal to do it on a residential scale. And I think obviously there's going to have to be some changes to the Title 22 regulations to allow that to happen. But I think if those happen, I believe that there are existing technologies that can meet those standards in a cost-effective way. So effectively now, so if you step back and think about this, we've heard 50% of all water use is outdoor, 50% is all indoor, roughly. If you reclaimed all your wastewater, you would reduce your water use by half, which is a fairly substantial number. So if we right now are at roughly, say, 55 gallons per capita a day, we'd end up somewhere around 22 gallons per capita a day if we actually were able to do that. So I think there's a lot of room to grow. I think there's a lot of opportunities. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the audience. We have folks with microphones. I know a lot of this has already been covered, so this is an opportunity. If you didn't have a chance to talk. Otherwise, we'll maybe have to ask some deep probing questions that might elicit conversation, deep probing responses. So I mean, we could step into all these questions. Why don't we step into the first one? And yeah.
On the web, people on the web. We have a smart water management company we started in 2002, and we have customers like Apple and Walmart and Google and eBay and 50 cities and a host of other marquee corporations. And when we talk about saving, they kind of go, "Arr." And what works for them is waste. People don't like to save, but they don't like to waste. Rich people, poor people, I don't care who you're talking to. If you say you're wasting, they go, "I want to stop." You're saying saving, if they're really wealthy, they don't care. So I've always been curious why this water argument from the state perspective hasn't focused on waste. And you're penalizing people who've been saving water historically by letting people who've been wasting water have an easier goal because they're at a brute 20%. It'd be more effective, in my humble opinion, to be telling people, look, in this first year of a concerted drought response, we want to eliminate 70% of waste. And that'll give you an orientation of, well, what is waste and how do we define it? But at least you have an orientation that gets people motivated the right way. And then we're going to move towards 80% reduction of waste. And I think it's just, I found in the last 12, 13 years, it's a much more compelling argument. Nobody loses a job at Apple or Walmart or Google because they didn't save 10% on their water bill, which amounts to nothing compared to what their total revenues are. But people do get in a lot of trouble if they're told they've been wasting. And so I think, what's been interesting, we have customers, Costco, Target, host of Lowe's, et cetera, who have been saving water for the last 5-6 years, and they're at ETO, minus 80% ETO, and they're being told they have to reduce another 30%, while a store across the way that's not been doing any savings has to reduce by 20-30% as well. And fine, the world's not a fair place. We all get that. This is an emergency. But what it does is it fosters a disingenuous incentive that actually is destroying the incentive. It makes people feel like, well, the best thing to do as far as public policy response is wait as long as you can, because finally, when they force you to do it, you'll be in a better position. Plus, it also makes the conservation argument a more interesting one.
So let me first say, for those of you who haven't seen it, we do have a state drought messaging website and communications portal, which is saveourwater.com. And one of the key messages on that portal is Californians don't waste. And there is a lot of messaging that we're trying to do around that theme. But this brings up a point, and I just want to given this is an example of the challenge we face. On our electric side of the house, we devote, depending on how you look at it, between $10 and $40 million a year to overall what they call MEO, marketing, education, and outreach on energy efficiency statewide. Does anyone want to guess what our state level water messaging budget is? Any guesses?
300,000.
Not quite that low. It's about 1.5 million. So at a state level, we have a messaging campaign, and it is focused on waste. But the scope of that campaign is limited by the amount of resources that we put into it. So it's a challenge, but as we've all heard today, the importance of the messaging and getting public acceptance for whatever it is that we're trying to do is paramount to any successful technology deployment and just changing culture overall. So it's a challenge, and we're grappling with it. But I think we take your point about sort of the importance of the framing of the message.
Yeah, I think the real point is really leading into Frank's question, which was so I'm very familiar with the Echo product. We've been testing it for a while, but after a while, you don't care. So my bathtub is this. There's a lot of things going on in everyone's life, and knowing that your toilet's using this, all you want to know are you wasting. And I think once we orient the problem set under a waste issue, then the data drivers and the urgency are much more vivacious and interesting. When I show our customers all this information, their eyes roll back in their head. But I show them one little chart and says, I'm wasting, dun, 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 and that waste has a host of, pun intended, downstream negative effects from it's overwatering your landscape, you've got, site damage, you've got runoff fines, you've got bad brand imaging if, it's a drought at the time. That's compelling, and I think when you ask what's going to drive this system, I think the M2M sensors will drive it faster than AMI does. I think, Echo and other solutions, as long as they orient themselves in a waste perspective, will highlight people. If it's just data for data's sake, I think it'll fall flat.
No, it's a very good point. And this issue of waste, I mean, it would come back to me, I'd say it's benchmarking. If you could go to 10 different pizzerias and explain to them how they compare to other ones, and then frame it in the reference of you are wasting compared to what the average is. I think that's a very powerful and compelling message. And I agree with you. Data for data's sake is not what I'm proposing. It's data for strategic messaging to folks.
I think we have another question in the back.
Well, I actually just comment and a question as well, and then perhaps you can help with the answer to the question. We've done a lot of the primary research behind behavioral perception with homeowners, contractors, property managers, facility managers, water providers, et cetera. And one of the things that comes clear from our research and everybody else's is that as a society, we underestimate our water usage by a factor of 3 to a factor of 5, and that's understating the issue. In Salt Lake City, the bedroom community is a Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District. The perceived household water use is 50 gallons a day. Actual per capita water use is 252 gallons a day. Furthermore, those same people who like to do the good thing, they're religious, they don't believe in waste, they think waste is a bad thing, are absolutely convinced they're using the right amount of water. So how do we marry that, and how do we overcome that challenge? Because you can't sell them on waste or water efficiency until they have a more realistic understanding of what their consumption is.
Is that a question to me, or is that... That's a Martha. Okay.
Thank you. I'm Madeline Glickfeld. I'm from UCLA. And I think that what you started out saying at the beginning, do you know what your water use is compared to others, is really the key thing. So when the state board put a list up on the web, it's maybe only us wonks that know about this, but when I started seeing what the average per capita use was in every water district that's come under the regulations, and you get to see what's low, what's medium, what's high, if you can figure out from your bill what your per capita use is, which is a sort of a major feat for people, they get it. They know. And this last weekend, I was at a party and with a friend, and he said, guess what? I just got one of the highest 1% water user letters from the city of Los Angeles. That's how they took their biggest residential water users and said, hey, you're up there. You need to do something. And he wasn't proud of that. He really didn't know what to do, but he knew he needed to do something. So I think that's part of the problem. We don't measure in ways that people can quickly figure out where they are, and we don't give them the kind of information that the state is now compiling, which compares them and their water district to others.
And just to add to that a little bit, I mean, the first step is making sure everyone has water meters, ideally they're AMI. The second is, in my view, is, and I don't quite know how to say this, but water utilities, historically have, and I'm talking about broadly water utilities. There's always exceptions here, but they run a series of reports. They're very used to accessing their data in a certain way, in part to meet regulatory requirements. But there's a wealth of information in there related to people's water use and how they compare to others that they could feasibly start messaging that back to the water users. And so there's companies that can do that, water utilities themselves can do that. So I think part of it just is really a cultural change at the water utility scale of saying, hey, let's look at our business in a little bit different way. And rather than trying to roll out rebates as the primary way of saving water, or rather than rolling out cash for grass to save water, let's roll out a really comprehensive campaign messaging people about their water use and how it compares to people like them. And I'm not saying cash for grass or rebates are bad, but I think that this needs to be incorporated into that mindset of what we do when we're in a drought and ideally when we're not in a drought.
So I see a bunch more hands up here, so maybe we can go 1, 2, 3, at least to start.
My name is Marty Laporte, and I worked for a small water utility. It's a huge challenge for a water utility to deal with data unless it's AMI data. So my question is, why is it not a requirement for new meters going in and retrofits to be AMI meters? Because really trying to get that information out to customers is next to impossible for a large agency when they only have monthly data and it's rolling in over a period of a week or two. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm assuming these are questions unless you told me otherwise. But so what I would say back, we've worked with a large number of water utilities in the state of California over the last couple of years related to water and energy use. And one of the things that we've noticed is there's quite a diverse set of databases that water utilities have. And also the number of databases. So the types of databases and the numbers, some utilities have 5, some have 30, and it reflects how different technologies are adopted. A lot of them come with a database, a SCADA system, you get a SCADA historian, you need a billing system, you have a billing system. So I think, in situations like what you're talking about, if it's a challenge, I think there's a huge opportunity for a company to come in and help standardize. I mean, you'd say, oh, I just don't want another database, but to standardize this so you have one database to put all your data in, and then it suddenly becomes accessible. So we've worked with probably 10 or 15 water agencies in the state of California to date, and one of the things we do is we ingest all their data into one database. And when we do that, they say that's hugely valuable. Just that in and of itself was worth working with you. And then we go on to do something else, and usually it's related to us quantifying how much energy is in their water. But the first step is we need to get all that data into one database. But once you do that, I can fairly quickly build you applications that allow you to identify all your water users, how much they're using, how to compare to them, and then you hook that up to a system that sends out information, and then you're good to go. So,
water agency has difficulty trying to buy into something that they can't build on because the standardization doesn't exist on the databases. So I'm just pointing this out because it's not as easy as just pushing the data to the customers. It's often late. My own water agency has 3-year-old data. The latest they can give me is 2013. So. Not for my own use, but for metrics about others using what I use compared to others.
Let me just add to that, to add some context to this discussion. On the energy side, over the last decade or so, we've gone through the transition from old meters to smart meters. That cost a little over $2 billion between PG&E, Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric to put in smart meters for all those customers. So that's a significant level of investment. The way that this was justified as being cost effective was, well, it's going to cost that much, but we're going to get some cost savings because we won't have to have as many meter readers because we're going to have this technology. Well, guess what? It's tough to lose that many jobs, right? The utilities found ways to hire these people back. We didn't get those cost savings. And the promise of these meters is that everyone would have this data and then all of a sudden, look at their data and make changes in their behavior. That promise is, I would say, yet to be fulfilled. So when we look now to the water side and we think about what would the level of investment be to put in all of this AMI, it's going to be a very large number. And whether it pencils out, I think, is something that is really remains to be seen. So this is a difficult thing because it's exciting. There's a lot we could do with the data. But the question we always have to ask is that our highest investment given other things that we can do with our limited resources?
I'm Mariana Grossman with Sustainable Silicon Valley. And one of the premises of a meter is that that people will change their behavior, that it's a behavior control kind of thing. And another way to think about it is you want to build a system that works. So, and that people don't have to think about. They don't have to kind of self-manage, but when they turn on the faucet, there's a aerator and less water comes out. And I've lived in several different conditions as a homeowner, as a renter of a home, and I've got data in both cases, but the data as a renter you can't really do anything about because you're not going to replace the toilets or the landscaping or anything like that. You're a renter. The landlord's not going to invest. And I've lived in a multifamily apartment where there's no data. You get a little percentage of everybody's thing that you don't even know as a community how much you're using. So I think that the information has to be, people have to be empowered to actually take action on the information. And one thing I think is really interesting is if you do, to somebody's point about rewarding people for reducing waste, if you have a cap and trade system where people get paid for going below their budget and they can sell their excess water back, either donate it to nature or get paid, like Aquajust or a system like that, that starts to be interesting because then you create a market where you have feedback and the data is actionable. But if you're just getting data that you're wasting water and you don't have the power to fix it, that's a problem. So I think rules are really important with policy and with technology being installed, and just not setting it up so that we waste water, but setting it up so that we use water in a very cautious way, in a way that it's precious and that we use water fit for purpose. So potable water for potable purposes and non-potable water for everything else.
Wait, one quick question. Your idea of capping water and then trading it, did you say aqua? Is that your idea or did you say aqua?
I said Aquajust. James Workman had that idea and has tried to create a company around it. I don't think they've gotten very far because one of the problems in a commons, which water is a common resource, so it's to everybody's advantage to waste as much as and use as much as possible, and the cost of that per person isn't that great. So it is to my advantage to be selfish in a system like that. So this is a way of trying to create a system, an economic system for trading water that rewards people for saving or for being efficient.
No, it's a great idea. Thank you.
Bob Hitchner with Nexus Seawater, and I want to go back to Max's beginning thing here where he was talking about what happens in 2025 and we look back and maybe it rained and nothing changed. And you've been talking about making public investments, essentially public investments in meters, which really don't save anything, and you're talking about how difficult it is to make such an investment. We're trying to sell water recycling to home builders. And we've been doing this, basically it's the gray water model. And 12 months ago, we were working very closely with KB Home, and KB Home has been extremely innovative and progressive in their thinking about this. They identified the issue 3 years ago, and they started working on it. But we didn't have interest from basically any other large home builder in the state. Today, we have interest from a large number of large home builders in the state. And for example, one of the large ones, which sells homes at $800,000 and up, is looking at adding our solution as an option that home buyers can buy. And they're going to move really fast, and they're going to start offering it from January next year. So, the process and the sell cycle going through home builders is actually very difficult. And if the El Nino comes back, who knows what's going to happen 12 months from now. So if you want to change behavior where you're not just talking about boards of directors of water agencies, you're talking about architects and home builders and water agencies and home buyers, you've got to put things into policy that are going to move them in that direction over a long period of time. And, so I hope in 2025, we're not looking back and saying, wow, we should do some gray water recycling. That would be really unfortunate.
I think that's a good point. And, there's been a lot written in academic literature about, how you go from early adopters to getting sort of the rest of the group to come along. We do have early adopters generally in water. I think our big challenge at this point is bringing everyone else along. I think 1, 2.
Bruce Mackler with US EPA. One of the things, and I know Max is involved with this, is in water loss. And real water loss, some measures, it's maybe 20 gallons per capita per day and greater. That's something at the utility level. And it seems like we haven't heard so much about ways of going about that. Obviously water audits and validation and then ways of trying to minimize it. I'd like to get your perspectives on where that should go. Because it seems like that's kind of low-hanging fruit. The utilities are going to have to start dealing with their infrastructure issues anyway. We already heard some of that today. The push in that direction seems like we get some value. So I'd like your opinions.
Sure. Yeah, you heard this morning, for those of you who heard the opening, that I think globally it's 14% real water losses, and everyone says that they're at 13.9, something to that effect. This is actually, water loss is a perfect illustration of the challenges we have in California, because we can't tell you statewide how much water loss there is. We don't collect that data. The data that is submitted sort of informally, we know that there are problems with the accuracy of that data. So it's an area where clearly there's water to be saved, or there's water waste to be eliminated. And one would think just overall that this seems like a good business proposition. It should probably pencil out, but we're not seeing the level of action that one would expect in a sort of, rational market environment. So it's an area where, we're working on trying to figure out, okay, what's the role of the state? What policy can we put in place to make sure that all of these water utilities around the state are, at least collecting the data and putting plans in place to minimize the leakage and breaks out of their pipes, because that's an important source of water, and as every drop becomes more and more valuable, every drop lost to a leak or to a pipe break is a real, it's an economic loss for that area and really for all of us. So it's the perfect illustration. There are a few companies that are in sort of the water loss management space, and a couple of them are based in California, and potentially if there's new regulation, there will be more. And then this will be a larger sort of market segment. But I think it remains to be seen.
Existing technologies largely involve listening to the pipe and trying to hear leaks, and they work well. But I think the more innovative technology that's just coming on the market that I think is really good is called district metering. So you put in meters, you sub-meter your water system. So you put in meters in your water mains at strategic locations, and then you have all the water outputs from your your customer water meters. So you know how much goes into the district, and you know how much leaves the district. The difference is how much you lost. And so what this allows water utilities to do is to very quickly prioritize which districts they need to focus these other technologies to go in and actually pinpoint where the leak is. So I think district metering is a really progressive technology that seems to be gaining a market share in some water utilities. Is East Bay Mud?
We have a pilot in a couple of areas just about to start. We've done it in the past sort of on using AMR technology where we're able to look at it.
Oh, East Bay Mud being a very progressive water utility.
Yeah. The thing we're doing a little differently at East Bay Mud is also varying the pressure to see how big an impact reducing pressure changes the water loss.
And for the uninitiated, can you just differentiate between AMR and AMI so everyone
Oh,
knows?
sorry. I just by that I was speaking loosely. Or AMR is you collect the data. In our case, drive-by manner, and AMI is more like through a fixed network where we get it basically the next day. But either way, we're collecting hourly increments, so we can look at the difference day versus night and line up the metering data with the flow data.
Rhodes, did you have a question?
I wanted to comment on this idea of AMI metering and AMR and so on, its value. I think utilities should begin to look at that as a tool to help the consumer manage their problem rather than a penalty sort of thing, because that's one of the places where inter-the-day data and day-by-day data could be really valuable. But I mean, I do get regular reports from a water utility that could be used to inform me whether I'm out of line, and I don't really pay. And there could be a lot done, I think, with integration of databases that every water utility doesn't have, but a lot of the cities that are also water utilities do, like integration of data on water consumption, lot size, the census, the number of bathrooms. My city has all those things and could give me a much more sophisticated report on how I'm performing compared to others. And of course, one of the big problems you have, if you have a 2-acre lot and a big home and somebody else, and you know that there's a large fraction of citizens in your town that live in apartments, you know that the fact that you're above average doesn't mean much. At least, I mean, it doesn't mean you're necessarily being responsible in the management of your property. It does mean in a drought like this, you have some kind of accountability. But I mean, we should look at this, I think, in terms of levels. So the first simple level is total consumption, you as a user. The next is per capita consumption. Maybe the next is consumption per square foot of lot you have, or per bathroom or something. And we can help the consumer in terms of where he's going to manage these things if we give better data. And I don't think it's that hard. I think it's hard. I don't minimize it, but I don't think it's undoable. The other thing is that, and some other speaker brought it up earlier, we have to recognize the incentives are very different for homeowners versus renters or apartment people who don't get information discriminated that way. And it's going to be structured very differently in terms of the incentives in those arenas. And finally, on the leak question, I think I would suggest that the state fund an early implementer somewhere to do a very sophisticated leak control thing, use that as a demonstration, and then begin to hold utilities throughout the state accountable for following that. But right now, there aren't any very good models for leak control. It's real easy to just say, I'm at 13.9.
We had a question up here.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Oh, sure. I guess I have a question, a comment and a question. So Bill Worthen, Urban Fabric, we're working on we're in the city and county of San Francisco, so we've had the gray water and a black water policy for a couple of years. So we actually have buildings that we've worked on, including multifamily residential that has on-site water reuse. And these are luxury condos in downtown San Francisco on the top of an 800-foot tower, and all their toilets are gonna be flushed with gray water. We put in an MBR in the basement of the building. And you're right, the residents could afford the water. It's not about that. It's a question about the developer is thrilled now that this is going, that they put this system in a year and a half ago. They made that decision not because they needed to, but because they chose to, and they wanted to get for LEED Platinum certification, so their drivers were different. But my question is going through all the experience that we've had on those projects, why are we talking about how much water can you save for all new multifamily residential development? Why aren't we talking about how much potable water do you need? If 50% of the water can be saved through on-site water reuse and 95% of the water in an office building can be done that way, why aren't we changing the discussion to say, why do you need potable water if you can reuse the water in your building? And making that a standard policy across the state, because it's a challenge for all new development. If we don't have enough water to go around right now, why don't we change the discussion and make it about how much water do you need? And change that. And also, I do think one of the best things that we could do at the moment is to mandate that either for the next code cycle or right now because of the drought as an emergency to require that purple pipe just be installed in all new development moving forward on the supply side, so everything is shovel ready to retrofit when you need to.
It's a very good point. And Joe Grindstaff, who was here earlier on one of the panels, is a big proponent of the state, the agency I work for in particular, using its constitutional authority to curb waste and unreasonable use to actually set reasonable use standards. And that's definitely a discussion that I think can be continued, and when there's a political will, there's a political way. But I would also be remiss if I didn't mention on the flip side of this, again, the agency I work for is getting sued right now for having the audacity to ask some people to provide us with information. So this is a political reality in this state.
So my question might be timely then. I was going to ask you, what can we do better with the data that we already have? We've been talking a lot about sensor data and the Internet of Things and new data collection means, but government sits on a wealth of data. I work with about 60 different state and local open data and performance management programs, and there's a ton of high quality government data on water. Where can government have an immediate impact publishing that data? I know that there's outdated laws preventing publishing of water logs and things like that at the municipal level, but what can we do better with the data that we already have?
Well, so we have the immediate experience of having for the last year been collecting data on water use by our largest urban water retailers. And I think the amazing, thank you, Heather, the amazing, Heather was applauding. The amazing thing that's led to is just the amount of interest. People look at the data. Individuals look at the data, the media looks at the data, NGOs look at the data, and all of a sudden people are asking questions, they're writing letters to us, to their boards of directors, they're tattling on their neighbors. You may have seen recently that a certain member of the celebrity class was called out for stealing water, and people are paying attention. That's the power of data. Just simply having it out there in the public really makes a big difference. So I think that's something that we do want to continue, and we do have access to a lot of data. I mean, we have sort of three main data collection entities at the state. We have a board, we have the Department of Water Resources, we have a Delta Stewardship Council. They all collect data. We don't share it very well. Sometimes data isn't even shared well within agencies. We have challenges of our own within government, believe me. I'll give you an example. Just 2 days ago, one room over, we were having a discussion about water rates. And there was a lot of talk about, well, we need better data on what rates these agencies are charging. And then I get an email. Email says, I won't say who we is, but we've been collecting this data. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Is it publicly available? Nope. A lot of challenges. Yeah.
Hi, Steve Jordan with Persimmon Hills Water District in Northern California. We have deployed, I guess, a large-scale pilot of about 80 AMI meters. We've gotten great feedback, and this is just in 2 months, but because we're finding leaks, right? The number one thing is people are saying, wow, I didn't know I had this much leakage. Now, we gave them to our platinum customers. We sort of self-selected the heavy users with that. But my questions are, one, is there any data or observation on what kind of percentage savings we should expect from finding leaks or changing behavior? And I guess that would be maybe to Frank. And then to Max, is this AMI data protected? In other words, can San Jose Mercury News or anybody discover this data next year during, let's say, the presidential election and use it against anybody?
You mean protected in terms of the Freedom of Information Act?
Yeah, I mean, I can see where people might not want their water use by hour published.
Yes, so we've looked in, so we're very interested in helping create an opportunity within the state to make water utility data more open source, open government, kind of that initiative. And so we've looked into that a fair bit. And so you as a water agency or the owner of the data has the right and ability to classify certain things as confidential in a public records release. So clearly personal identifiable information would be wiped from the file that you would provide someone. Outside of that, it appears as if, the data itself is, don't quote me, I'm not a lawyer, but from our read on this, it appears like the data itself is part of the public record and could be asked to be released. I know the city of Davis, during their water rate revision, the city of Davis is a city about 20 miles that way, it ended up with a Freedom of Information Act request, and they end up releasing all the account level water use data with the customer identifiable information removed from there. But getting back to your question too, okay, and then your second part though was, how much can, yeah, so, and these are leaks, I'm assuming on the downstream side of the meter. So this would be in the house, not on the utility side. Yeah, so I mean, it's a range, but it could range from 0 to upwards of 50%. I mean, what we've noticed is that generally when you have leaks, they are substantial in nature. So it's 10, 15, 20% type thing. And oftentimes it is with the outdoor landscape irrigation. Toilets are also notorious. And then just pipe breaks from, in your water main are the three most common things we've seen.
So Chair Weisenmiller from the Energy Commission is in the back of the room here, and he can probably speak to this even more than I can. But on the energy side, we've been running energy efficiency programs for decades now, and in more recent years, we've realized, we really need to target those programs, whatever they are, to different areas, to different neighborhoods. And simply getting the data sort of at the zip code level so we can see if energy use is higher over here or at this time or not as high over here at that time has been a challenge. Finding the right balance between maintaining customer confidentiality of the data so that you can't identify, this person at this address using this much data while still aggregating at a level that is useful. It's an ongoing challenge. So I guess that's the first thing. And then just to add to what Frank said, certainly we know that it's double-digit percentages that are possible both on behavior change and on water loss reduction. Of course, it varies around the state, but there have been a lot of studies that have looked at this. And when we see the greatest reduction when you put a rate, a conservation program like a rebate program, and then a really robust customer communications package together. When it's all there together, then you get really big reductions in use.
Just quickly to add to that, just related to the behavior. So our recent recession, I think, was a really good opportunity to kind of test what the upper limit might be associated with behavior. So we worked with a few cities who looked at, the fact that their salaries were going down, they didn't have a lot of money, and one of the first things to do is to begin to let their yards go, stop watering, things like that. So, the upwards limit looks like about 18%. And so then the bottom, some of the companies that roll out water messaging right now are seeing about a 5% minimum. So it's roughly it's between 5 and 18% based on behavior, just behavior.
We have another question in the back.
Hi, Emilio Tenuta from Ecolab. So on the slide you lump together residential and commercial water use efficiency. Most of the discussion's been around residential. Could you give us a perspective on the impact to commercial and how you see the commercial side, the industrial and institutional side, managing data, kind of a current state of what you think where they are in this process of water reduction strategies as well as the monitoring and data management?
That's a big question. There's a lot going on. And of course, when you talk about the commercial industrial sector, that's a big sector. When you're talking about businesses as diverse from restaurants to golf courses, and then on the industrial side, things like petroleum refining and other industrial food processing applications. But just to give a couple of examples, I was recently contacted by a major supermarket chain that said that they had done a review of their, I can't remember, dozens, 70 odd facilities in California for their water practices and had achieved tremendous savings just from that type of focus review. And larger corporations do this type of thing all the time, but with sort of the increased awareness, they were spurred to do it and realized tremendous water savings and cost savings, of course. On the industrial side of things, a lot of large industrial customers over the past couple of decades have transitioned to using, high quality recycled water for their operations and processes, and they often enter into specific contracts with the water supplier for that. East Bay Mud is a great example. Since they're here, they've got a contract with the Chevron refinery in Richmond. They send the recycled water up there. It's a great win-win. So there have been these types of adoptions of technology and use of data to sort of make management decisions in the industry, but we can see more. So just as an example, we have over 800 golf courses in this state. I'm always surprised when I ask people, well, how many do you think you have? Because often it's like, oh, there must be 4,000 or something like that. It's not quite that high, but only a third of them are using recycled water. The rest, that's over 600 golf courses, are still using potable water. That's a lot of irrigation. And then when you add parks and you add cemeteries and other large users, you realize the scope of opportunity to go to more efficient irrigation, to switch off of potable water to recycled water. The opportunity is there.
I just add one thing. I think the big challenge with the commercial and industrial, and to some extent institutional, but commercial and industrial, is benchmarking. So for a business to understand how they compare to other businesses like them, and I think that's a necessary first step then for a business to say, look, I'm not doing well, and I need that now to look into how to make my business more efficient. So Sierra Nevada Brewery is very, the brewery industry as a whole is very attuned to how many gallons of water does it take to make a pint of beer, But other industries, that's not even part of their terminology in terms of how they look at their business model. So I think more and more businesses need to start incorporating that into their strategic visioning of how they do business.
Peter has his hand up, I think because the Pacific Institute has written about corporate water responsibility.
We have, although that wasn't why my hand was up. I wanted to follow up on Emilio's comment and ask sort of a rhetorical question. If anybody in the room other than Heather Cooley knows the last time the state of California did a comprehensive assessment of water use in the commercial and industrial sector. What year? 1995. So if you look at the questions, how do we expand and improve data for better water use? We don't know how much water by sector in California each of the commercial and industrial sectors is using. And it does get to the corporate social responsibility question, and there needs to be more information. If we're going to capitalize on the improvements you've described, sort of company by company or even sector by sector, that's a data gap, a huge data gap.
I think we've got time for one more question.
Oh, David.
David, you've got the mic.
I apologize, I was a little late. I'm assuming this wasn't discussed, but another thing I know of that I don't see listed here is better meter technology that can be more accurate. We've done some studies and showing how much of the water usage is below the meter accuracy level and how much of the usage is that we assume most of that usage is leaks because we see it as continuous usage at low flows. So I don't want to put a number on it just yet, but it's quite a bit. And as one of the initiatives is to get more accurate water meters so we can give better price signals to customers and better identify leaks that would not otherwise be identified.
Yeah, I know that meter accuracy is an issue. I think that on the electric side, you know, it's if you're below 1.5% inaccuracy, that's generally industry standard. I'm not sure what it is for water. So for those who didn't hear, the leakage rate is below the measurement of flow, so we often don't capture it, which is a great point. So I think that this discussion really sums up sort of the spectrum of challenges that we face in this area, and certainly I think that the need for a lot of follow-up and a serious look at next steps, which I hope that you all will be engaged with, at least for those of us who work in government and have to sort through and figure out, you know, how to prioritize, because there's a lot we need to do. I think this is one of the real takeaways, at least for me, from today, and I've been working in water for a decade now, is just how much is left to be done to even get to a sort of baseline where we can make really informed management decisions. As some of you know, there are parts of the state where there are still no meters. This is something that we're working to remedy, and we're really talking today about going, you know, on the leading edge, and we've got to ensure that we can bring the other edge along with us as we move forward. So, Carolyn, I think we're done, right? Okay, so 15-minute break and then back here for the closing plenary. Thank you.